Serious. What are some cryptid/ghost/unexplained stories you'd be willing to share? Part 2. Unexplained story here. So I was walking home from college one afternoon. It's about a 2-mile walk between home and college. I'm on the outskirts of the town center and entering a busy neighborhood, and everything seems normal until I start getting a creepy feeling like I was being watched or something. So I look around and what do I find? Literally every person looking at me and watching me as I go past them. Even the people driving were looking at me as they went past. Like there was this one guy who was turning the corner to come onto the road I was about to cross, and he was legit leaning over in his seat, staring at me as he drove around the corner. Happened for the entire way home, but hasn't happened since. Was super freaked out. Didn't tell my family or friends because they would think I'm crazy, and y'all out there saying this world ain't a simulation. A couple of years ago, my wife and I chartered a boat out of Key West to do some snorkeling and sandbarring? Whatever. So we were 6 miles west of Key West in about 3 feet of water, shelling and picking up sand dollars. It's just me and my wife in the water and the boat captain for miles as far as we can see. Maybe 50 yards off to one side of us, I notice a hard shadow moving slowly through the water. I watch it for maybe 30 to 45 seconds and it stops moving. I keep looking and a head pops up and is looking at me. It's far enough away that I can't make out the details, but it's a blue and orange humanoid head. We stare at each other for what feels like a minute, but it's probably 5 to 10 seconds. The head drops back underwater and the shadow takes off underwater at unimaginable speed. Neither my wife or the captain saw it, or if they did, they didn't mention it. I didn't say anything to them about it. I never felt threatened. My distinct memory when face to face with whatever it was actually thinking, nobody is ever going to believe this. This isn't a story involving me. It was actually when my mom was a little kid, so I've only heard this story from my grandma, who likes to tell me things like these when I visit her. My grandma was traveling with my mom and her 3 younger siblings. One of them was a baby, and the others were toddlers or just young kids. Of course, handling 3 hyper kids and 1 baby on an airplane isn't that fun, and my grandma was beyond exhausted by the time they took their seats. My grandma chose a back row on the flight, sitting with the 2 youngest while my mom sat in the other row with her sister. Things quieted down for a bit when they took off, but as time went on, Mom and her siblings grew more restless. Lots of whining, complaining, and crying that made my grandma wish she could just sleep and forget it all. Just as my grandma's about to lose it, a man sitting behind her taps her shoulder, and my grandma turns to look at him. He frowns, noticing how tired she is, and asks if she'd like help calming down her crazy kids. Of course, my grandma is so done that she quickly agrees. Side note, nowadays, I don't think people would be so quick to hand over their babies, but this was back when strangers were a lot more chill with each other, so I guess that explains that. My grandma quietly reads, a wave of relief washing over her as the man hands my mom and her sister's coloring books and quiets down the baby by dangling an interesting toy over the seat. And for the rest of the plane ride, everything was quiet. My grandma says it was the most quiet she'd ever had since my mom was born. The plane lands. My grandma thanks the man and starts getting my mom and her siblings ready to get off the plane. Of course, she's really excited to introduce this man she's befriended on the flight to my grandpa and tell him how he saved her from a hell of a flight. My grandma gets off the plane with everyone and meets up with my grandpa. She proceeds to excitedly tell him all the details and that he should wait with them to meet the man. After all, the man was behind them and would be one of the last ones to get off the plane. They were both in back rows. 10 minutes went by, then 15. They had been watching people get off the whole time, but the man never showed. My grandma was incredibly puzzled by this. How could he have possibly disappeared when they were sitting in front of him and had gotten off the plane before him? My grandma worried that something happened to him, stopped one of the crew members who had a list of all the people on the flight. She asked for his name, which she had learned on the flight, only to be given this response. Sorry, ma'am, there's no man's name on the list. To this day, no one knows quite for sure who this man really was or where he could have gone. My grandma and I think that he was some sort of guardian angel or spirit sent to help her in a time of need. I've shared this on Reddit before, but here goes nothing. I have two, both of which occurred fairly recently, not long after my grandfather's passing. The first one was when one of our kitchen lights, which we have never had a problem with before or since, went through this weird 3-week period of its light bulbs spontaneously burning out just a few days after we put them in. We went through several bulbs, several boxes of bulbs, the same result every time. We even called an electrician to see if there was some sort of power surge going on. He couldn't find any sort of explanation. It was only that light. None of our other appliances had any sort of problem. Then one night, one of the bulbs randomly exploded out of nowhere at like 10 o'clock at night, when the light wasn't even on. Now my mom is a pretty big skeptic, but even she was freaked out by that one. Ever since the explosion, the light has worked normally, no further issues. The second one was my dad's telescope randomly falling over when I was home alone. For context, my dad's telescope is big and very heavy. This fact is important. My parents, coincidentally, were visiting my grandma, my late grandpa's wife. I stayed behind because I had a test due that day that I had completely forgotten about. Thanks, online course, for not notifying me. Anyway, so I'm home alone, mentally kicking myself for my stupid mistake and not being able to go see my grandma because of it, when I hear the loudest crash I've ever heard in my life coming from downstairs. It sounded like the front door being slammed open. I thought someone was breaking into the house. I am legitimately terrified, like fight or flight response fully activated. I grab my knife, go downstairs, mentally preparing to stab a man if I have to, and my dad's telescope is on the floor. That thing is way too heavy to fall over on its own. There were no open windows, so it couldn't have been the wind. Something would have had to have pushed it. But when I searched the house, nobody was there. What was even creepier was that there were drag marks on the carpet, meaning that the telescope moved at least a few inches along the floor before it tipped. Still freaks the hell out. I don't know why, but my childhood house was haunted, even though it wasn't even that old. I think it was built like 4 years beforehand. Anyways, the house was just weird. My parents never believed my siblings and I, but when we were alone, we would see shadows out of the corner of your eye. When watching TV, you could see into the hallway and into the guest bedroom and just always see something there, and I remember we always kept the door closed for that reason. One night, I was up for whatever reason, probably like 10 or something, and my sister suddenly calls my name at like 1 a.m. We shared a room, and she scared the shit out of me. I answered back and she's all like, "Did you hear that girl crying?" And I asked, "What the F does she mean?" And she says she heard a little girl crying in front of our window. Now I'm freaking out because my bed was next to the window and that window faced the front yard, so anyone could gain access. But the craziest thing was that I didn't hear a thing. I told her to shut up and try to go to sleep even though it freaked me out. Probably at 3 a.m., I'm awoken by the same girl crying right outside. I was scared, but I just tried my best to ignore it. We discuss it in the morning, and we were really hoping it was our little brother. It was a long shot, but we asked him and he said no, it wasn't him. He thought we were the ones crying, and he was on the opposite end of the house, and of course, my parents didn't hear shit. But one that actually happened directly to me was when I was like 11/12. My parents went to work at 4 a.m/6 a.m., and they would wake me up to go sleep with my little brother, as he had a problem sleeping by himself and would cry when they left. I was fine with it, but I would be the first to wake from my siblings to get ready for school. It was probably like 7:40 when my alarm went off and I got up to use the restroom. As I'm sitting up, clear as day, I hear a man with the deepest voice ever go, "Don't go, stay with me." And I just froze. After a couple minutes, I just laid back down and hoped it was over. After my second alarm to wake up my siblings went off, I got up because I didn't hear anything else for 20 minutes. My brother, who was right next to me, didn't hear anything, and neither did my sister. No one in my family has a voice that deep, let alone no one in the house could speak like that, as we were two 12-year-old girls and a 5-year-old boy. But I never heard talking after that, and we moved when I was 13 years old. We always told my mom about this, and she never believed us. Not a single child she believed, until one night we all just sat down and talked, and she told us how she also felt it, but thought we were being dramatic, until one day, her friend felt the biggest slap on her ass from nothing. Again, no one there. Then my mom started wondering if maybe we were telling the truth, especially since years have passed and we all have stuck with the same story. Never experienced anything like that again. As I'm not a believer in ghosts, etc., I would put this under unexplained, but I know a few people I've told this story to who would say otherwise. At the time, I'm probably 16 to 17, and as such, one of the older members of our Boy Scout troop. Our troop travels to upstate New York, Indian Lake. It's a state park with campsites that are on islands in a lake. The only way to access the campsites are by boat. The scoutmasters reserved enough campsites for the number of scouts and parents going. But when we arrive, we realize that the sites are all split on separate islands. In fact, one of the sites is all by itself. Myself and my two friends, being the elder scouts, decide we will take that site and have it to ourselves. The canoe trip from the main island to ours was probably a 30 to 60 minute canoe ride away. Adults stopped by in some motorized boats to drop off some food, but otherwise we had the site to ourselves. In fact, a quick 5-minute walk around the island's empty campsites confirmed that we had the entire island to ourselves. No one was using the other sites located on the island. As night falls, we build a fire, make our burgers, eat our snacks, and shoot the shit. I'm sitting at the picnic bench when from the nearby trees comes a growling and barking. My buddy John is frozen, already someone who is afraid of dogs. Paul is the only one who can get a good look at it, as it was obscured to my eyesight by our tent. He is too frozen, handling his flashlight like a weapon, but afraid to turn it on. For the longest 10 minutes of our life, the growling and barking continues. The sightlines in darkness made it difficult for us to identify what type of animal it was. Our guess was a dog, as opposed to a wolf, but at no time did we hear its owners, and after all, we're on an island a 30-minute canoe ride from where anyone might be with a dog. Eventually, the animal left the site. We stayed still for 15 minutes more, making sure it was gone. Being the youthful, scared idiots that we were, we retreated to the place where we felt safe, our tent. There, we stood with our flashlights ready to beat anything that might attack. We planned on taking shifts, staying awake in case it came back, but eventually all succumbed to sleep. With daylight upon us, we took a walk once again around the island, looking for any signs of the animal or any other campers that might have arrived later the previous night. We didn't find anything. Posted this elsewhere, but it never gained traction. This past July, I went for a tubing trip on the Au Sable River in northern Michigan with family. We went upriver to float down to our property abutting the river. This is in the middle of the Huron National Forest and a gorgeous river for fishing and swimming. My family and I loaded into a pickup truck and headed a few miles upriver to a small trail that leads down to the river. Unfortunately, my uncle nearly missed the turnoff and pulled in a foot off the trail of the drive and slashed the inside of a tire on a culvert. In total, it was myself, my aunt and uncle in their mid-60s, my cousin, and his 2 daughters. Sadly, no one brought a cell phone, and the spare was rusted to the undercarriage of the truck bed. My aunt, who doesn't like to wait for a solution, decided to hike back to the cabin immediately while we waited. I went with her, because my aunt shouldn't be the one to do this in the first place. The walk is along a state road, a 2-lane country highway with either a 55 or 45 mile per hour speed limit, depending on how twisted the road is as it winds through the Huron. Both sides of this road are shrouded by tall white and red pines, occasional birches and the like. Very scenic, very lovely, yet very hot in the early afternoon of early July when one would rather be tubing down the river. We walked east up the westbound shoulder and vehicles would pass every few minutes. Typically, you could either hear a distant radio or music playing, followed by the nearing rumble of a car or truck coming. Nothing out of the ordinary. However, as we walked, we heard what sounded like classic rock music coming from the trees. It was coming closer, and it truly sounded like an oncoming vehicle or someone moving on an ATV or bike, except there was no sound of an engine or rumble of tires. I thought perhaps someone was just out of view in the tree line. There are no houses or cabins in the stretch of the road, nor trails or roads. It's pure forest. The sound came closer, and I was trying to identify what song it was, as it sounded somewhat familiar, or so I thought. My aunt, lovely lady, kept walking and busting ass without so much as a care in the world, rather sure she was cursing my uncle repeatedly. Within the span of 30 seconds, the sound was nearly on top of us, yet we couldn't see any source for the music. As it closed to within 30 feet of us, still off to our left in the forest, it should have been obvious, but it wasn't. And that's when the music became louder, along with a bit of buzzing like static or flies. And then it was there, invisible. It was perhaps 5 feet from us, and it had to be, I tell myself, a swarm of flies, buzzing in unison, and in differing octaves of the same notes, definitely not classic rock music, but oddly and incredibly musical. And the noise moved at a clip like the passing cars and trucks going 45 to 55 miles per hour. I was expecting to have to swat or run from a swarm, but yet there was nothing there. No black dots swirling about. Nothing landed or stung or bit us. And as quickly as it came upon us, it kept moving and passed behind us, heading westward. And as it left our area, the audible buzzing diminished, and its noise wrapped back into the sounds of classic rock music. Now, I'm aware we used to have a tent bug problem in northern Michigan. This year, Traverse City released scores of black flies to annihilate them, which they have in our neck of the woods. The only thing I can fathom is that it was from a swarm of flies buzzing and flying in such a manner as to produce such a noise. However, I've not been able to Google foo any evidence such a thing can occur. We walked on, and I stated to my aunt that was the oddest thing, and she shrugged it off, agreeing, but not caring. I was hydrated, not drunk, which is blasphemous this time of year in this location, or high, also blasphemy, and dismissed the occurrence as, I'll figure it out later. I don't really believe in the paranormal. In fact, I don't really believe in it at all. But I do have a few stories that stick with me that are unexplainable to my brain even years later with a more adult and reasonable thought process. The first that comes to mind is one I always tell my friends that gives me chills and freaks me out and will always make me feel some type of way for the foreseeable future. I was probably 9 or 10 at the time, and my dad was in the military. We were stationed in Fort Knox and lived on base in a provided military apartment. I moved around a lot growing up and have plenty of superstitious family members. So at the time of being a child, the fear of the supernatural always existed. I lived pretty normal, and then I made a friend named Dylan. Hope he is doing well these days. One day after school, his mom invited me over to their home. They also lived on base. Right away, entering that apartment, I felt very uneasy, or like someone was watching me. However, as the day went by, I played with him and his little sister, and things were normal. Nothing amiss. And so on his birthday, I returned to his home for the final time. When I came through the door again, I got that uneasy feeling. This time, I asked him about it, and his demeanor changed, as well as his little sister's. He didn't really want to talk about it. Being young, I found that to be a bit strange. As his birthday went on, I found myself needing to use the bathroom. There were 2 bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs. I went to enter the bathroom downstairs, and without a missed breath, him and his sister both say, "We don't use that bathroom, don't go in there." I didn't really think much of it until he asked if I would stand outside the door of the upstairs bathroom while he used it. Things now seemed off, and that uneasy feeling sank in. I complied. We went upstairs. He went to pee and left the door wide open and asked me not to let anyone shut it, which freaked me out because it was just me and him upstairs. I was dying to piss and asked if he would stand outside because now I was nervous, to which he refused. Angry that he didn't return the favor, I stormed off downstairs, yanked the bathroom door open, and meant to take a piss. Kind of funny, and it gets a little funnier and terrifying. 10 years old, pants halfway down, I'm about ready to piss when the lights go off. The switch is inside as well as the lock, which frightens me because now I can't see and I have my pants down. Then it flicks back on and then off again, and then begins happening a lot more rapidly. What gives me chills is that to this day, I distinctly remember seeing the light switch flip itself up and down on its own. This picks up. Now a terrified 9 or 10-year-old, I begin to panic and try to open the door. I got the door open at about a head's width and it slammed on me really hard. Lights are still flickering. I open it again and go to step out, and it slams on me even harder, now crying for his mom or anyone because the lights are flickering and the door is slamming on me. His mom hears me plea and is yanking on the door, to which I am pushing. Finally, the door flung open and both her and I went falling forward at the force. I cried and went home. It really ruined me being friends with Dylan, and we never talked about it. I remember later my mom asked if I remembered that story and told me his mother called and apologized. She also proceeded to tell my mom further that her and her husband had been experiencing a lot of things in the apartment, one being that she would wake up in the night to something raising the covers off of her husband and whispering his name. I don't believe in ghosts, but that is one of the most terrifying and unexplainable portions of my childhood, and experience unlike any other. Ghosts have always gravitated towards me. I used to live in an apartment that was redone because of a fire and someone died because of it. I had no clue that the apartment I lived in had the death. I happened to choose the room where the woman passed. The whole time I lived there, I'd get shaken awake at 7:30 every weekday morning. I'd look and see no one, go back to sleep, and immediately get shaken again. Look, and again, see no one. Try to sleep again, get shaken even harder. I'd get up and go to the couch. At 8 a.m., I'd get shaken again, go back to my bed and go back to sleep. I worked nights as a dishwasher, so 7:30 and 8 was too early for me. When my girlfriend moved in with me, that's when I realized it was a woman who died in my room when the fire happened. Because after my girlfriend moved in, I'd still get shaken awake every weekday morning at 7:30 and 8, but my girlfriend wouldn't. Women get changed together all the time. So having my girlfriend in the room was fine to this ghost, but not me. And 30 minutes is just enough time for a woman to get ready for work after her shower. We figured she liked us because we'd start to hear a disembodied laugh every now and then. Not a bad laugh, a genuine, that's funny laugh. It spooked everyone who heard it at first, but we got used to it after a while. Then one day my girlfriend invited my ex-girlfriend over. No biggie, they were friends. My ex and I agreed, after a troubled relationship, that we're better friends. That female ghost hated my ex. The room would get cold whenever my ex came by, and she'd hear angered growls, just my ex. One night, when they were getting ready to head out to the bar, my ex took a shower at the apartment because it was better than hers. She comes out of the bathroom white as a ghost and scared. "Didn't you hear me yell?" she asked us. "I thought you guys were fucking with the light in the bathroom. It kept going on and off. I could hear the switch. Then the water goes ice cold, and I could see the outline of a hand go past the shower head. No, not a word came from the bathroom. I guess the ghost doesn't like you," my girlfriend said. "You did not say anything about a ghost here," my ex said sternly. "How can you live like this?" "Oh, she loves us. We make her laugh," I said. "Really, all I hear are growls when I come here. Explains why it gets cold when you come by," my girlfriend said. "I thought you had no heat. Heat bills paid. It only happens when you're here," I said. "Fine, I won't come by anymore. She clearly hates me," my ex said. She never went back to the apartment. After that, it went back to normal. Every weekday, I'd get shaken awake at 7:30 and 8. The disembodied laugh came back. Then a year later, we moved out. I'm fairly certain the ghost came with us because my roommate who lived with us said it was too quiet and the apartment door stopped opening and closing on its own at 8 on weekdays. I had no clue about the door to the hall until he said that.